These sentiments are not foreign importations. They are the indigenous cries tearing forth from the tormented souls of millions of Ugandans scattered across the globe. The era of our mute complicity has ended. We invoke the name Mamdani, not for the vanity of applause, but as a totem, a singular vision of the dignity and governance that the Ugandan people have been denied for too long. As I draft this manifesto, a tremor runs through my fingers, yet it has nothing to do with the glacial winter winds rattling the casements of New York City Hall. It is not born of the mounting fiscal emergencies, resting heavily upon my desk, nor the immense burden of serving as the chief magistrate of the most formidable metropolis in the Americas. No, this trembling is visceral. It is the weeping of Uganda resonating within my very spirit. I am Zohran Mamdani. The patronymic may be familiar to you. I am the son of the illustrious Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, a child cast out into the void of exile before I possessed the vocabulary to comprehend what banishment truly meant. I was a refugee forged in the crucible of displacement, maturing in the spaces between India, South Africa, and ultimately these United States. Just 2 months prior, I took the solemn oath as the mayor of New York. The public hailed it as a grand victory, exclaiming, "What a magnificent odyssey from stateless refugee to magistrate." Yet tell me, how does one raise a glass in celebration when one's ancestral soil is being drenched in blood? How is it possible to find repose in the quiet of the night when my own kin Ugandans of my own blood are executed in the streets merely for possessing the audacity to dream of a republic? I do not address you this evening wearing the mask of a mayor, nor the robes of an American official, nor as a detached observer. I write with the raw heart of a son of the Ugandan soil. Regardless of the decades that separate us, the rhythm of Uganda still pulses in my arteries. I write because memory is a duty. I recall the majesty of Lake Victoria, not from sight, but through the descriptions my father painted over worn photographs. I recall the cradle of the Nile, a sacred site I have never been permitted to approach. I hold fast to the Luganda cadence my mother instilled in me, a linguistic lifeline we clung to, even as we drifted through the diaspora. And tonight, upon witnessing the tragic image of David Makar, a 23-year-old engineering scholar at Makerere University, assassinated simply for bearing witness to the vote, count my spirit broke. To remain silent now would be an act of betrayal. My chair compatriots understand that this is not a mere political tract. This is an epistle written in anguish by a son who is devastated by the desecration of his heritage. This is a dispatch from an elder brother exiled far away, reaching out to his younger siblings who endure suffering in the land of our fathers. It is the collective voice of the millions of Ugandans in the exterior, proving that while we left the territory never abandoned our hearts. Beyond my window pane, New York is an inferno of electricity. The yellow taxis flow like a river down Fifth Avenue, while the subway thunders in the belly of the earth. 9 million souls navigate the currents of this city that refuses to sleep. Yet, I am denied slumber because 3,000 miles away, 54 Ugandans were slaughtered during the exercise of democracy. Figures of the opposition were shackled and detained in the very act of tallying the voice of the people. The digital lines were severed, plunging the nation into darkness for 4 days to obscure the reality of a larceny committed in broad daylight, an election stolen. And I, perhaps the most celebrated figure of the Ugandan diaspora in the Occident, have held my tongue until this hour. Tonight that silence is shattered forever. Permit me to articulate the gravity of maturing as a refugee from one's own nation. I was merely 4 years of age when we were compelled to flee Uganda. The calendar date escapes me. The terror lurking in my parents' gaze has faded from memory, as has the frantic packing, the hushed conspiracies, and the flight under the cover of midnight. However, the aftermath is etched into my soul. I recall my father seated with me in our modest flat in India, unveiling the archives of our past. He showed me sepia-toned images of a paradise I could scarcely reconstruct in my mind. There was Lake Victoria shimmering in the twilight, the verdant hills of Kampala, and the chaotic vibrancy of the Nakasero markets. "This is your patrie, Zoran," he would insist. "Never let the memory fade." Yet what distinct cruelty is it to call a place home when the regime forbids your existence there? I recall the Sunday rituals where my mother would instruct me in the nuances of Luganda. She would prepare matuki, the plantain steamed within banana leaves, and the aroma would colonize our apartment. For those few hours, we ceased to be refugees in a strange land. We were transformed back into Ugandans, preserving the flame of our culture through the sacred acts of cuisine and conversation. I remember beseeching my parents repeatedly, "When shall we return? When will I witness Uganda?" And I recall the profound melancholy in their eyes when they could offer no prophecy. As I matured, the grim reality became clear to me. Return was impossible because President Yoweri Museveni had transformed Uganda into a domain where scholars who posed dangerous questions, intellectuals who demanded justice, and citizens who spoke truth to power found no sanctuary. My father's transgression was simple. He authored books that interrogated the legitimacy of authority. He instructed his students in the art of critical thought. He held the conviction that a true republic requires citizens capable of deconstructing power, not merely submitting to its yoke. And for that noble cause, we were branded refugees. I came of age in exile, my dear countrymen. I grew up suspended between civilizations. I was not entirely Indian, nor truly South African, nor completely American. I remained eternally Ugandan in my soul, yet legally barred from claiming that identity on its own soil. Can you comprehend the psychological toll this takes on a child? To mature with the knowledge of a homeland that rejects your presence. I would observe my peers discussing pilgrimages to their grandparents' villages during the holidays with envy. I witnessed families organizing expeditions to their ancestral estates, and a sharp pain would pierce my chest as I wondered if my feet would ever touch the red earth of Uganda. At the age of 15, I confronted my father, "Will the day ever come when I see Uganda?" He regarded me with eyes welling with tears and replied, "Perhaps, my son. Perhaps when the winds of history change direction. Perhaps a dawn will break when the leaders of Uganda cease trembling before the gaze of their own citizenry." I stand here now at 36 years of age while my father has reached 79, and yet we remain suspended in an endless wait for that liberation to arrive. However, the tectonic plates of history shifted mere months ago. It was in November 2025 that the populace entrusted me with the mayoralty of New York City, and assuredly it was not due to the aristocracy of wealth. It was not a triumph born of dynastic connections, nor was any privilege placed into my hands by the elite. No, this mandate was secured because I dedicated 5 arduous years to the art of civic mobilization and organization. 5 years spent traversing the boroughs, rapping upon thresholds from the streets of Queens to the Bronx, and deep into the heart of Brooklyn, engaging with the soul of the city. 5 years of lending an earnest ear to the expatriates, to the proletariat families, and to the youth who sensed that the grand machinery of the Republic had abandoned them to the margins. My initial defeat in the election of 2020 left me in absolute ruins. I feared that perhaps the establishment was an insurmountable fortress, that reform was nothing but a mirage. Yet in that darkness, the wisdom my father instilled in me resurfaced to guide my spirit. True lasting transformation is not the child of a single ballot or a fleeting moment. It is born of relentless organization, of the weaving of social bonds, and of an absolute stubborn refusal to ever capitulate. Thus I continued the crusade of organizing, proceeding door by door, block by block, and quartier by quartier, knitting together a tapestry of resistance. I knocked upon 10,000 doors. I was present at hundreds of community assemblies. I bore witness to thousands of personal narratives, absorbing the hopes and grievances of the people. I forged a grand coalition, uniting the Latino communities, the Black communities, the Asian communities, the working class in all its magnificent diversity, standing shoulder to shoulder. I offered no sorcery or miracles. I pledged only to listen to struggle in the trenches alongside them, and to never endure amnesia regarding the humble origins from which I emerged. And in November 2025, we triumphed. We did not win via the bayonet, nor by plunging the internet into darkness, nor by shackling my rivals, nor through the instruments of terror and manipulation. We claimed victory through the majesty of organizing, through the sacred process of democracy, and through the patient architectural work of building trust, one conversation at a time. When the verdict of the polls was delivered, I stood before my supporters, the immigrants, the refugees, the laborers, and I declared to the assembly, "This victory is the empirical proof that democracy functions, that organizing yields results, and that the common people, when unified, possess a power that eclipses any political machine." And are you aware of the repercussions that followed, my dear compatriots? The youth of Uganda erupted in celebration within the streets of Kampala. Bobi Wine dispatched a communique to me via the digital sphere. He wrote, "Congratulations, brother. You bestow hope upon us all. You demonstrate that our generation possesses the capacity to lead through democratic means." The opposition leader Joel Senyonyi remarked, "This serves as a profound motivation for us in Uganda. It illustrates that the impossible is in fact achievable." In that precise moment, a profound realization struck me. I was no longer merely the mayor of New York. I had metamorphosed into a symbol and emblem of what the countenance of Ugandan leadership could resemble. A living testament that democracy is not merely a Western importation or concept, but a universal aspiration that Ugandans are fully capable of achieving. That is precisely why on this night, silence regarding the tragic events in Uganda on January 15th, 2026 is an impossibility for me. For if I, the refugee who ascended to the mayoralty through the rigors of democratic organizing, remain mute while the republic is assassinated in my motherland, then what significance does my own victory truly hold? Monsieur le Président, I address you by that title not out of trepidation, but out of deference to the high office that the Ugandan citizenry once in good faith entrusted to your care. Yet today, as a son of the soil, I must pose to you the inquiry that millions of Ugandans are murmuring in the shadows, silenced by the terror of speaking too boldly. Have you suffered a loss of memory regarding your own identity? I have analyzed your history, Monsieur le Président. I am aware that you were not always the autocrat. You were once the liberator. In 1986, when you seized the reins of power, you were 41 years of age. You were youthful, driven by ideals and brimming with aspirations for the future of the nation. You had waged war against the dictatorship of Obote. You had witnessed the horror of a single man hoarding power for too long, of the military brutalizing the civility of the state, and of elections reduced to mere theatre. You pledged to the world that Uganda would chart a different course. You declared, and these are your precise words, that no African head of state should occupy the throne of power for more than 10 years. You asserted that the scourge of Africa in general is leaders who linger beyond their welcome. You voiced those sentiments, Monsieur le Président. Those were your own axioms. What has become of that young revolutionary? What fate befell the man who believed in accountability, in democratic transitions, and in the peaceful, noble transfer of authority? Allow me to elucidate what transpired. You gripped power for 5 years, then 10 years, then 20 years. And somewhere along that winding path, you ceased to be the revolutionary and metamorphosed into the very monster you once battled against. You became Obote, you became Amin. You became indistinguishable from every African despot who convinced himself that he alone was the savior of his nation, that the people were helpless without him, and that liberty could be postponed just a moment longer. And now, 40 years hence, you are 80 years of age and still clinging desperately to the scepter. Not because Uganda requires your presence, but because your ego cannot conceive of a Uganda that exists without you. Monsieur le Président, have you interrogated your own conscience? What would the 41-year-old Yoweri Museveni think of the 80-year-old Yoweri Museveni? Would he be swelled with pride, or would he recoil in absolute horror? Permit me to speak of David Mukasa, Monsieur le Président. He was 23 years of age, the precise age you were when you first took up arms to fight for the liberty of Uganda. He was the same age as millions of young Ugandans are today, all looking toward the horizon, hoping for a future that is not stolen from them. David was a student of engineering at Makerere University in his 3rd year, the preeminent scholar of his class. His professors attested that he possessed a brilliant mind, one destined to construct the infrastructure of Uganda's tomorrow. On the morning of January 15th, 2026, David volunteered as a polling observer. He did so not for financial gain, nor because he was coerced by external forces, but because he held a sacred belief in the process of democracy. He harbored the conviction that his ballot carried weight. He maintained the faith that Uganda was capable of transformation. He subscribed to the very same noble ideals that you once championed, Monsieur le Président. It was precisely 7:34 in the evening. While David stood vigilant at the Nawa polling station in Kampala, meticulously scrutinizing the electoral officials as they tallied the ballots, a soldier approached him from the rear and discharged a weapon directly into his cranium. Death was instantaneous. The card proving his registration as a voter remained clenched within his lifeless grasp. His ledger, in which he had been rigorously documenting the count to ensure the sanctity of every suffrage tumbled open upon the ground, the ink of his figures dissolving into a spreading pool of arterial red that obscured the numbers he had written with such precision. His mother, Madame Grace MacArthur, delivered a communiqué 3 days following the tragedy. Though her voice possessed a stoic steadiness, her hands betrayed the tremors of profound grief as she spoke. "My son placed his faith in the Republic of Uganda," she declared. "He was convinced that a horizon of prosperity and justice was within our reach. He believed that democracy was not a mirage, and for holding that conviction, they slaughtered him. Monsieur le Président, it is imperative that you grasp this reality. David Mukasa was no insurgent. He was not an operative for foreign powers. He posed absolutely no peril to the security of the state. He was simply a young Ugandan citizen who embraced the revolutionary ideals that you yourself preached in decades past. And he lies in the grave today because an agent of your administration, an individual acting on your directives, an individual emboldened by your 40 years of absolute impunity, judged that a young man witnessing the truth of the vote was a liability that had to be erased. David was but one among 54, Monsieur le Président. 54 Ugandan citizens massacred during this electoral cycle. 54 lineages, severed 54 destinies stolen by the state. Thus, I pose this question to you, Monsieur le Président. With all the deference I can summon, if you genuinely secured 71% of the suffrage, why was the sacrifice of David Mukasa a necessity? If the populace of Uganda truly acclaimed you with such overwhelming numbers, if your triumph was authentic and honorable, if the will of the people truly prevailed, what need was there to assassinate the observers of the election? Permit me to speak without diplomatic ambiguity, Monsieur le Président. Let us articulate the open secret that rests on everyone's lips, yet few possess the temerity to voice. The events. We witnessed nothing less than a grand masquerade, a carefully orchestrated mise-en-scène intended to drape a veil of legality over what is in truth the perpetuation of 4 decades of absolute autocracy. Let us dissect the dossier before us, casting aside raw emotion and state rhetoric to focus solely on the cold, hard reality of the facts. On the 13th of January 2026, merely 48 hours prior to the casting of ballots, your administration severed the digital arteries of the nation. Every website, every social network, every digital courier vanished. For 4 interminable days, the Ugandan territory was plunged into an abyssal silence, isolated entirely from the global community. Your Minister of Communications claimed this censorship was a necessary hygiene measure, a step to halt the proliferation of rumors and preserve the sanctity of the electoral ritual. But let us speak with brutal candor, Monsieur President. The only rumors you sought to stifle were the testimonies of your own citizens revealing the machinery of your oppression, and the only integrity you protected was the secrecy required to falsify the tally without witnesses. Reflect upon the gravity of this, my fellow citizens. Consider the implications when the state deliberately blinds the populace and renders them mute during the supreme moment of civic choice. When I stood for election in New York, the digital public square was electric with debate. Twitter was a battlefield of ideas, and Facebook vibrated with the energy of the campaign. TikTok was inundated with the youth passionately dissecting the stakes of their future. That is the visage of true democracy, open, chaotic, and utterly transparent. It is a system that does not fear the light. Yet you, Monsieur President, chose the shadows. You blocked the international observers and shuttered the internet. You tallied the voice of the people behind closed doors in the dark. This is not the confidence of a legitimate victor, but the trembling paranoia of a despot. The dossiers from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are damning. They report that during the counting phase alone, 147 agents of the opposition were thrown into irons. 12 regional coordinators from the National Unity Platform were detained by the state apparatus. The chief strategist for Bobi Wine was held incommunicado, vanished for 72 hours, while military forces raided the headquarters of the opposition as if storming an enemy trench. Monsieur President, allow me to pose a question of elementary logic. If you truly commanded 71% of the electorate's favor, why was it necessary to incarcerate the very witnesses charged with verifying your triumph? If the soul of the Ugandan people truly resonated with your vision, if your mandate was irrefutable, then what spectre haunted you? What could these opposition observers possibly achieve? Could they rewrite millions of ballots to steal a victory you supposedly secured by a landslide? Or were you terrified that if men of integrity were permitted to conduct a simple, honest audit, the fragility of your house of cards would be exposed to the world? In my own victory in New York, hundreds of volunteers from the rival camp stood watch over the count, scrutinizing every slip of paper. Not a single one faced the handcuffs, for in a functioning republic, transparency is not an enemy of the state. It is the very bedrock of legitimacy. Yet here we mourn 54 Ugandans extinguished in 72 hours, not by tragedy or illness. They were cut down by the very security apparatus paid to protect them, shot by police and soldiers for the crime of participating in the civic life of their nation. And among those 54 martyrs, at least 10 were observers of the election, citizens like David Makasa. These were the youth volunteering to ensure the sanctity of the vote. And Monsieur President, the Fokine have spent a lifetime analyzing the architecture of tyranny. I have studied the history of authoritarian regimes across the epochs, and one axiom remains absolute. A leader who wins the hearts of the people does not need to execute those who count the votes. You claim a mandate of 71%, Monsieur President. Let us place this figure within the trajectory of history. In 2011, you claimed 68%. In 2016, 60%. In 2021, it fell to 58%. Yet suddenly in 2026, you claim 71%. Do you not see the absurdity of this pattern, my dear countrymen? As the brutality of the state intensifies, as the repression deepens, as the cemeteries fill with dissenters, we are asked to believe that President Museveni's popularity miraculously soars. We are to believe that as he ages and clings to the throne, as the youth of Uganda, who have known no other ruler, grow desperate for change, his adoration among the masses supposedly expands. This is a defiance of political physics, Monsieur President. In a true democracy, the fortunes of a leader ebb and flow with the tide of their governance. They face legitimate rivals, and sometimes they are swept away, but in your version of Uganda, the logic is perverse. The more you crush the people, the grander your margin of victory becomes. This is not democracy, it is not even competent theatre. It is a grotesque insult to the intellect of every Ugandan citizen. Monsieur President, you have reached the age of 80 and have held the reins of power for 40 years. 40 years. When you ascended to the presidency in 1986, I was not yet of this world. Bobi Wine was merely a child of 4 years, playing in the dust of Kampala's streets, singing nursery rhymes, unaware that the man seizing the palace would still be wearing the crown when he reached middle age. An entire generation of the Ugandan nation has been conceived, birthed, and raised under your shadow. They have matured, wed, and brought forth their own progeny, all while you remained immovable upon the seat of power. Let the weight of that reality settle upon you 40 years. In that same span of time, the United States inaugurated 7 different presidents. The United Kingdom saw 8 prime ministers enter and leave Downing Street. South Africa dismantled apartheid and elected 5 presidents in a free society. Ghana has peacefully transferred the baton of power between opposing parties 6 times, proving that democracy is not a fable but a practice. Yet for 4 long decades, the Ugandan narrative has been dominated by a single figure, a solitary voice, an immutable vision. Monsieur President, you profess a profound devotion to Uganda. You claim that every action you undertake is consecrated to the supreme good of the nation. However, one is compelled to pose the question, how can a single individual, regardless of his brilliance or benevolent intent, possess the monopoly on truth for a nation for 40 years? Is it truly your conviction that in a republic teeming with 48 million souls, you alone bear the capacity to govern? Do you truly believe that the youth of Uganda, the sparkling intellects like David Maka, have absolutely nothing to contribute to the destiny of their fatherland? Or do we face a reality that is simpler and far more tragic? You have held the reins of power for so long that you have succumbed to the fatal error of confusing your own person with the state itself. You have persuaded yourself that any dissent against your regime is an assault upon the very sovereignty of Uganda. You have neglected the fundamental axiom that every democratic leader must embrace. Nations are not the private property of their presidents. Presidents are but servants of the Republic. And Monsieur President, after 40 years, the hour has come to allow Uganda to be guided by another hand. Not because you are malevolent, nor because you lack achievement, but simply because 40 years constitutes an eternity in politics. It is enough. Because the essence of democracy is the rotation of elites. Because new epochs demand fresh perspectives. Because the young citizens of Uganda have earned the right to steer their own country. This is not an unprecedented event, Monsieur President. We are not witnessing an isolated accident of history, nor a tragic oversight. This is not a mere anomaly. It is a pattern systematic, calculated, and ruthlessly repeated every 5 years like clockwork. Cast your mind back to 2011. President Museveni claimed 68% of the suffrage. Dr. Kizza Besigye found himself in shackles on multiple occasions. The streets were choked with tear gas. Live ammunition was deployed against peaceful assemblies, and international observers catalogued a litany of electoral irregularities. By 2016, the claim was 60%. Besigye was arrested 4 times during the campaign season. The security apparatus utilized brute force to stifle the opposition's voice. The digital public square was shuttered on election day. Then came 2021 with a claimed mandate of 58%. A total digital blackout descended upon the nation, silencing the internet completely. Opposition candidate Bobi Wine was detained in his own home for 11 days. The prelude to the vote was written in blood, with over 100 civilians perishing in the pre-election crackdowns. Now in 2026, the cycle intensifies. Museveni claims a staggering 71% of the vote. For 4 consecutive days, the internet vanished again. 54 lives were extinguished. Opposition leaders were seized even as the ballots were being tallied. International observers were barred or severely restricted. This is not the practice of democracy. It is a regime that has perfected the art of self-preservation every 5 years. It is the eternal return of violent suppression and statistics manufactured to suit the narrative. The only fluctuating variable is the percentage. It climbs higher even as the popular will is silenced. But legitimacy cannot be fabricated in the forges of violence, and no measure of repression can serve as a substitute for consent. You may compel a populace to remain indoors through the terror of force. You may manipulate the tallies under the cover of a digital blackout. You may proclaim any figure that pleases you, but you cannot mandate belief. You cannot earn genuine loyalty through the barrel of a gun or the threat of arrest. You cannot construct a legacy upon a foundation of corpses. History will not revere you merely as the man who secured 71% in 2026. The tribunal of history has already cast its verdict upon your legacy. You remain the figure who sacrificed 54 Ugandan lives merely to cling to the throne. To my young compatriots, my brothers and sisters in spirit, I sense your profound exhaustion. I recognize the burning indignation and the sharp sting of betrayal, for you executed your civic duties with impeccable precision. You registered, you participated, and you endured the crushing heat of the sun in those interminable queues to make your voices heard. You cast your ballots holding on to the fragile hope that this dawn would be different. You served as guardians of the vote, much like the courageous David Makaza, risking your physical safety to defend the sanctity of the Republic, only to witness the machinery of the state snatch victory from your grasp yet again. They severed the digital arteries of the nation, shutting down the internet to stifle your ability to coordinate and organize. They detained your vanguard while the tallies were being manipulated, and they extinguished the lives of your comrades, whose only crime was ensuring the mechanisms of democracy functioned as intended. And now the regime expects your docility. They demand you swallow this injustice, move forward, and wait in silence for another half-decade, hoping that perhaps, if you are sufficiently submissive, the master might grant you a crumb of genuine liberty. I perceive the visceral rage that consumes you. I understand the depth of this existential despair. I know that insidious whisper in your psyche asking, what is the utility of this struggle? Why persist when the entire apparatus is rigged against us? I recognize this sentiment because I too stared into that abyss following the failure of my first campaign in the year 2020. But I implore you, listen closely, my younger siblings. Heed the counsel of an elder brother who has traversed this arduous road before you. I am beseeching you, sending this plea across the vast ocean that separates us. Do not grant the oppressors the ultimate satisfaction of witnessing your self-destruction. Do not allow your legitimate grievance against Museveni to metastasize into fratricidal violence against your fellow citizens. Do not let the gerontocracy, whether ancient in spirit or in years, weaponize you as instruments against one another. Do not reduce your own neighborhoods to ash. Do not engage in skirmishes upon the cobblestones of your streets. Do not spill the blood of your brothers and sisters over the tragedy of a stolen mandate. For here is the inevitable causality of such actions. You will decimate your own infrastructure. You will fight, and regrettably, some of you will perish, leaving your families in absolute ruin. And when the smoke of rebellion clears, when the corpses are tallied and the devastation surveyed, President Museveni will remain secure within the walls of his palace. The political class will remain unscathed. The military hierarchy will rest comfortably in their quarters. The wealthy elite will still possess their fortunes in offshore accounts, while you, the people, will have been stripped of everything. It will be your mothers weeping in the night. It will be your fathers burying their offspring. It will be your sisters bearing the scars of trauma. Your brothers will be deceased or languishing in damp cells. Even worse, the regime will exploit your violence to legitimize further oppression, tighter control, and an extension of their reign. Observe their strategy. They will turn to the international community and proclaim, "Look at the savagery of the mob." Do you see why a firm hand is necessary? Do you see why we cannot yet afford them the luxury of democracy? Do not hand them this pretext on a silver platter. There exists another avenue, my dear friends. It is a more arduous path, a slower progression demanding a reserve of patience far greater than any citizen should be required to possess. Yet it is the only strategy that secures ultimate victory. Permit me to articulate how I triumphed in New York and how you can replicate this success in Uganda. When I faced defeat in 2020, I was shattered. I contemplated abandoning the cause entirely. I hypothesized that perhaps the system was too corroded by corruption, that capital was too dominant, and that the son of refugees could never ascend to power. But then, the wisdom of my father returned to me. Do not agonize, organize. Consequently, I dedicated the subsequent 5 years to meticulous organization. Not daily protests, not setting fires, not clashing in the streets. I knocked on 10,000 doors. I traversed every corner of my district, leaving no stone unturned. I spoke with immigrants juggling 3 employments. I listened to mothers anxious about the quality of their children's education. I sat with the elderly discussing their healthcare concerns, going door by door, block by block, community by community. I wove networks, I constructed coalitions. I trained volunteers. I registered the electorate. I compiled lists. I built administrative systems. It lacked glamour. It was devoid of drama. The sensationalist cable news ignored it. But it was effective. Because true political power is not forged in the headlines. It is constructed in kitchens, in sanctuaries, in schoolyards, beneath the shade of mango trees, and behind closed doors where the cameras never intrude. It is built when neighbors transform into comrades. It happens when fear is transmuted into discipline, when silence evolves into quiet, steely determination. This is the slow, patient labor of liberation. You may never see your name printed in a newspaper. You may never receive accolades on a podium. But if you commit to this grind, if you present yourself week after week, even when the situation appears bleak, you become the bedrock of a liberated Uganda. And to those entrenched in power who claim the status quo is eternal, let the chronicles of history remind you no regime, however violent or established, has ever outlasted the collective will of a people united in purpose. Museveni may command the battalions. He may dominate the judiciary. He may monopolize the airwaves, but he cannot commandeer trust. He cannot hold the truth captive. He cannot assassinate an idea whose hour has struck. This is the method of our victory. Not through ballistics, but through solidarity. My dear siblings, you must grasp a crucial reality. You cannot construct the Uganda of your dreams if you are in the grave. You cannot lead the republic if you are incarcerated. You cannot transform the nation if your spirit is broken. Strategic patience is not cowardice. Choosing to survive is not an act of surrender. President Museveni is 80 years of age. I will state something that may appear clinical, but it is simply a biological fact. One way or another, his era is approaching its inevitable conclusion. It may take a single year, perhaps 5 years, or even a decade, but make no mistake, the regime's expiration date is written. And when that curtain finally falls, the nation will turn its eyes to you. The Republic will demand a vanguard of youth who possess the intellect to organize the strategic mind to forge alliances and the wisdom to distinguish between historical failures and pragmatic solutions with networks primed for action. The motherland will require a generation that rejects capitulation, that turns away from the tragedy of fratricide, and refuses to grant the autocrat a victory forged from your own self-destruction. You must incarnate that very spirit. Allow me to confide in you a lesson from my own political journey, a story of human connection. During my time mobilizing the boroughs of Queens, I encountered a formidable matriarch named Madame Rodriguez. She had been the anchor of her apartment for 40 years, witnessing a parade of opportunists who arrived with heavy promises only to vanish like smoke. When I approached her threshold in the year 2020, she regarded me with the weary cynicism of experience. "Another young aspirant with grand illusions," she remarked. "You will erase us from your memory the moment the ballots are cast." I was defeated in that contest, yet I did not erase Madame Rodriguez from my mind. For the subsequent 5 years, I remained a constant presence, not merely during the fever of the campaign season, but in the quiet months between. When her residents faced tyranny from the property owner, I assisted in unionizing the tenants. When her grandson required guidance for university admission, I bridged the gap to necessary resources. When anxiety regarding neighborhood security plagued her peace, I facilitated committees for community protection. I did not undertake these actions with a strategized return to the ballot in mind. I acted because moral obligation demanded it. True mobilization is not a game of elections. It is the architecture of trust and collective problem-solving. In 2025, when I sought office once more, Madame Rodriguez transformed. She did not merely cast a vote in my favor. She mobilized her entire residential block. She engaged in dialogue with every single occupant. She ensured that every citizen possessing the right was registered. She personally transported her elderly neighbors to the voting stations. And on the evening of our victory, Madame Rodriguez wept tears of vindication. "You returned," she whispered to me. "Against all expectation, you actually returned. Compatriots." This is the fundamental doctrine. Authentic transformation is born from authentic relationships cultivated through the passage of time. Museveni possesses the armory, he commands the treasury, he holds the reins of the state apparatus. Yet you possess an arsenal far more potent. You possess the fraternity of one another. And if you organize within that fraternity, sustaining and trusting one another, you become an unstoppable force of nature. Here is the secret. They are desperate to conceal from you their terror of your potential eclipses, your fear of their brutality. Why do you suppose the regime severed the digital lifelines? It was out of sheer panic over what you might reveal to the global community. Why do you suppose he detained the observers at the polls? Because he trembled at the evidence you would archive. Why do you think he massacred 54 souls? Precisely because he was petrified of your achievements. His brutality is not a demonstration of power, it is the hysterical reaction of fear. A statesman who is genuinely revered, truly beloved and supported by the populace has no need to silence the internet. He has no necessity to imprison witnesses. He has no need to slaughter the youth. He invites scrutiny. He welcomes the light of transparency. He celebrates civic participation. But the dictator does the inverse because he is burdened by a truth he cannot articulate. But let us be unequivocal, we did not desert Uganda. The nation was stolen from our grasp. We did not abandon our heritage. We were expatriated by ballistics, by terror, by destitution, and by a system that bolted every gate save for the departure terminal. Yet even from the diaspora, our affection for Uganda has never waned. We have never ceased to hallucinate of her liberation. Thus, when the regime brands us as traitors, remember he fears us because our tongues are unshackled. He fears us because our vision is unclouded. He fears us because we cannot be muted by his constabulary, nor purchased with his hollow pledges. We are not puppets of the West. We are the sons and daughters of the soil, carrying the Republic in our very marrow. We are the progeny of Kasese and Kampala, of Arua and Mbale. We are the resounding echoes reverberating from Gulu to Boston, from Jinja to Johannesburg. And we refuse to be obliterated from history. So to the diaspora, recognize that this battlefield is yours as well. Not with munitions, but with your intellect, your franchise, your expertise, and your solidarity. Bolster the organizers on the front lines. amplify their narratives across the globe, finance their initiatives, guarantee their security, elevate the name of Uganda in every corridor of power you enter. Because one day, when the fog lifts and the old order collapses, allowing a new Uganda to ascend, you will wish to look your children in the eye and declare that you did not avert your gaze. You will wish to say, yes, I was distant in geography, but I was present in spirit. We know the reality. We are not betrayers. We are refugees of conscience fleeing dictatorship. We did not depart because our love for the country ran dry. We departed because Museveni transformed the land into a place where brilliance meets a dead end, where inquiry is hazardous, and where speaking truth is a capital offence. We are the physicians in London, preserving lives in British hospitals, remitting funds monthly so our kin may survive the economic winter. We are the engineers in Toronto, constructing infrastructure on foreign soil while dreaming of laying the foundations at home. We are the nurses in New York, labouring through double shifts to settle tuition fees for nieces and nephews whose faces we have not caressed in years. We are the educators in Nairobi, instructing a foreign generation while our own offspring mature without the embrace of their grandparents. We are the labourers in Dubai, toiling under the relentless desert sun, inhabiting cramped quarters, sacrificing our very essence so that our families back home might simply break bread. Citizens, listen closely. We remain Ugandan in our very souls, regardless of the decades spent in exile or the foreign passports we now carry in our pockets. The tie to the homeland is unbreakable. On the weekends, we meticulously prepare the matuke, instructing our children on the sacred art of eating with one's hands, preserving the rituals of our ancestors. We congregate in cramped apartments, huddled together to watch the Cranes play football, our cheers echoing as passionately as if we were standing right there in the heart of Nakasero Market. We insist on teaching the Luganda tongue, ignoring the teenage sighs of our offspring who question its utility. We recount legends of Lake Victoria, the majestic source of the Nile, and the eternal beauty of the Pearl of Africa. The essence of the nation courses through our veins. And precisely because of this bond tonight, I implore you refuse the comfort of silence. I comprehend your trepidation. I understand the gnawing anxiety for your kin remaining in the territories. The terror that your words might invite retribution upon them is real. However, one must acknowledge a brutal truth. Our mute compliance is the very fuel that powers their machinery of violence. When we hold our tongues, when we avert our gaze and feign normalcy, we grant the autocrat permission to proclaim to the globe that the populace adores him, that peace reigns, and that the republic functions. We possess liberties denied to our brothers and sisters. We stand shielded by protections they can only dream of. Our voices carry across borders to the ears of the international community. It is our civic duty to exercise this privilege. Compose urgent missives to your elected deputies. Demand audience with your members of parliament. Besiege the offices of your senators and congressional representatives with the truth. Alert the global institutions on the digital public square. Disseminate the irrefutable dossiers of the atrocities occurring on the ground. Narrate the tragedy of Uganda, not to shame our motherland, but because our devotion is too profound to witness her demise without a scream of protest. I turn now to the elite among the diaspora, those who have amassed fortunes, established enterprises, and ascended to the corridors of influence. Utilize your capital. You need not seek political office as I have done, but you must articulate the cause. You must organize the resistance. You must contribute to the struggle. Construct robust networks of expatriates dedicated to the restoration of democratic ideals within our borders. Envision the power if every prosperous Ugandan abroad pledge their allegiance to the democratic mobilization at home. Consider the vast war chest of resources we could amass. Visualize the alliances we could forge. Picture the historical shift we could engineer. We are far from impotent. We are essential. We constitute the global legion for liberty. And rest assured, one day, perhaps not at this dawn nor the next, we shall make our return. We shall return not as fugitives, not as the banished, but as citizens reclaiming a liberated republic, a land where our descendants need never flee into the night. That glorious epoch approaches, and we must labour tirelessly to manifest it. Monsieur le Président compatriots, allow me to speak with absolute lucidity regarding the path forward. I harbour no illusions. I do not anticipate that the incumbent will peruse this manifesto and undergo a moral metamorphosis. I do not expect him to awaken and surrender his authority of his own volition. 4 decades of absolute rule do not dissolve, merely because of a single epistle, regardless of its eloquence or logic. Yet I believe in the sacred act of confronting power with truth. I believe in issuing distinct imperatives. I believe in inscribing upon the historical record what justice necessitates. Thus, I present 3 ultimatums, not entreaties, not polite suggestions. These are requirements. Every individual detained since the 13th of January 2026 must be liberated immediately. Every opposition figure, every monitor of the polls, every dissident, and every journalist. Monsieur Bobi Wine must navigate the streets without the shadow of harassment. The cadres of the National Unity Platform must exit their cells. The student revolutionaries must be unshackled from the prisons. The 147 election observers seized during the tabulation of votes must be released and offered reparations. Monsieur le President, if you genuinely secured 71% of the suffrage, you should have no terror of these citizens walking freely. If your mandate is as absolute as you proclaim, if your triumph is legally sound, then the voices of the opposition pose no danger to your throne. Set them free. Permit them to orate. Allow them to organize. Let them contest your vision through the mechanisms of democracy. For a statesman secure in the affection of his people has no need to imprison his detractors. I call upon you to invite the United Nations Human Rights Council, the African Union Commission, and neutral international observers. They must launch a rigorous inquiry into the 54 souls lost during the electoral period, the accusations of ballot manipulation, and the systemic fraud. Investigate the abduction of monitors, the draconian blackout of the internet, and the deployment of military ordnance against the civilian population. Grant these investigators total uninhibited access. No restricted zones, no government chaperones, no intimidation of those who wish to testify. Let them interview whom they please. Permit them to scrutinize every document. Allow them to publish their conclusions without the censor's black ink or fear of vengeance. Monsieur le Président, if you conceal nothing, you need not fear the transparency of the light. Let the world witness the reality. Let history inscribe the actual events. So you have reached the age of 80 years. Even if you somehow maneuver another victory in the year 2031, you will be 85. No mortal exists eternally, no sovereign reigns in perpetuity. Biology imposes term limits even where constitutions fail. At a certain juncture, be it 1 year, 5 years, or 10, you will depart from power, whether through retirement, infirmity, or the grave. The solitary question remains, what manner of Uganda will you bequeath to the future? Will your bequest be a Uganda, primed for a democratic transition where institutions supersede individuals and where the peaceful transfer of power is the norm? Or will you leave behind a legacy of chaos where your departure creates a vacuum of power because the entire system was constructed solely around you? A personal fiefdom where factions tear one another apart in a violent scramble for the throne because there was no plan for succession. The annals of African history are replete with warnings of leaders who refuse to prepare for the day after. We have witnessed the civil wars. We have seen the military coups. We have seen entire nations collapse because one man deemed himself indispensable and stayed beyond his time. Is this the destiny you desire for Uganda, Monsieur President? Therefore, this is the demand we make announced publicly and with clarity. Let it be known, this will be my final term. Uganda requires a new captain at the helm. I shall dedicate my remaining days in office to fortifying the Republic's institutions for a democratic transition and ensuring the peaceful transfer of power. Take this path, and history shall remember you with honor. Do this, and Ugandans will celebrate your heritage rather than celebrating your departure. Do this, and you will be immortalized as the man who liberated Uganda not once, but twice. First from Obote in 1986, and finally from yourself in 2026. Refuse, and you will be remembered only as the man who loved the throne more than he loved his country. The choice, Monsieur President, rests entirely with you. But history is a harsh judge, and it possesses a long memory. My dear compatriots, let me bring this missive to a close. As I stated at the outset, this is not an official communiqué from Zohran Mamdani. These words are not endorsed by the mayoral office of New York City. Yet these are the sentiments carried in the hearts of millions of Ugandans, both in the diaspora and on home soil. These are the words we wish our most prominent figures would voice. It is a message that demands to be heard whether Zohran Mamdani speaks it or not. This manifesto is issued by the collective voice of those who cherish Uganda too deeply to remain complicit through silence. We stand as the nursing corps in New York, remitting our earnings each month not for luxury, but to finance the burials of the youth massacred by the Musi regime. We represent the physicians in London who harbour grand visions of reconstructing our nation's hospitals, yet find those ambitions paralysed by a dictatorship that renders such progress impossible. We are the engineers situated in Toronto, yearning to dedicate our technical expertise to the motherland, yet fully aware that voicing the truth there invites incarceration or a darker fate. We are the matriarchs who made the agonizing choice to leave our offspring behind, dreaming of a future reunion in safety, only to witness them mature from a distance deprived of our presence. We are the patriarchs enduring triple shifts in foreign territories, laboring so that our kin may survive under a chaotic administration that has fundamentally abandoned its duty to protect them. We are the scholars pursuing knowledge in exile, physically present in global academies but with spirits anchored in Kampala, haunted by the uncertainty of an eventual return. We constitute the diaspora, and we hereby declare our absolute refusal to remain mute any longer. President Musi, it is probable you will disregard this missive. Indeed, you likely will, dismissing it as the disconnected lamentations of exiles who purportedly fail to grasp the realities on the ground. You may brand us as dissidents, puppets of Western powers, or foreign provocateurs, yet you possess no mechanism to stifle our discourse. You are powerless to dismantle our digital connectivity, and you lack the jurisdiction to imprison us for our demand for judicial rectitude. Crucially, you cannot arrest the ideology. We embody the conviction that Uganda merits dignity and that 40 years of one man's rule is an absurdity that must end. We champion the fundamental principle that the youth have an inherent right to assume the mantle of leadership. We uphold the vision that democracy is attainable, that civic mobilization is potent, and that brutality is not the sole avenue to power. My own victory in New York stands as proof that this is no naive fantasy. It is a tangible, achievable reality. To my younger compatriots, I impart this solemn truth: the dream has not been extinguished. It is merely postponed. While the election was hijacked, the sovereign will of the Ugandan populace was illuminated with absolute clarity. You were present. You cast your ballots, you mobilized, and you rejected intimidation. Despite the theft of the vote, they cannot pilfer your resolve. They cannot assassinate hope, nor can they imprison the future itself. You must continue the work of organization. Weave your networks through every hamlet and municipality, for the labor undertaken in these obscure times will yield a harvest in the dawn of liberty. Maintain the record. Archive every transgression, capture every falsehood, and preserve every fragment of proof. History demands this veracity, and future justice relies upon this dossier. Persist in your education. Analyze the triumphs of democratic movements globally, discern the lessons of success and failure, and instruct one another. Enlighten one another. Enhance your civic capacity and forge alliances that transcend ethnicity, religion, and geography. The true fortitude of Uganda lies in its pluralism. Do not permit them to fracture your unity, and maintain your faith. Not a credulous hope, but a strategic conviction rooted in realism. Trust in the possibility of change, for history teaches us that every tyranny ultimately collapses. Every autocrat eventually relinquishes control. The sole interrogation remaining is what succeeds the fall. Above all, you must survive. Your existence is essential to me, to the nation, and to the destiny of our people. For the Uganda, we envision a republic where democracy is substantial, where the youth lead without terror, and where the freedom of speech. It is a vision of a society where speaking the truth is not a death sentence, where the sanctity of the ballot box is absolute, where the digital public square remains open, and where David Mukasa would still be breathing, constructing bridges between our communities. That version of Uganda is on the horizon. Perhaps it will not arrive at this very hour, nor with tomorrow's sunrise, nor even within the coming calendar year, but make no mistake, it is advancing. History teaches us that transformation is inevitable. It is absolute. Occasionally, it arrives with grace when statesmen possess the wisdom to bow out with dignity and step aside for the common good. Other times it is forged through the meticulous organization of the citizenry building leverage over eras, or simply through the inexorable passage of time and the natural fragility of human biology. Yet rest assured, the hour always strikes. And when destiny knocks at Uganda's door, you must be prepared to answer. You must be prepared to take the helm, prepared to administer the state, to reconstruct our institutions, and to mend our wounds. This is why I implore you to survive this dark chapter. I urge you to turn your agony into organized action, to be tactical rather than merely enraged, to conserve your vitality for the moment when the motherland calls out your name in freedom. For that moment is written in the stars, and when it manifests you must be standing tall, ready to serve. To every observer bearing witness to those convinced that Uganda merits a grander destiny, to those who realize 40 years is an eternity in politics, and to all who grieve for David Mukasa and the 53 souls extinguished merely for dreaming of democracy, we must render this cause inescapable in the public eye. Address Zohran Mamdani on the digital networks, not with hostility, but with a firm, polite reminder. We are watching you. We observe what you symbolize. We derive fortitude from your precedent, and we maintain the hope that you will find the civic courage to articulate our plight. Appeal to the United Nations Human Rights Council. Appeal to the African Union. Call upon Amnesty International. Call upon Human Rights Watch. Alert the International Press Corps. Alert every conscience that needs awakening, not because we wish to shame our nation, but because silence is the accomplice of oppression, and we categorically refuse to be mute. In conclusion, I wish to make a personal covenant. It is uncertain if I shall ever again hold a mandate from the electorate. The trajectory of my political journey remains obscured by the mists of time, but I offer this solemn vow to you, my cherished compatriots. You shall never be erased from my memory. Regardless of the comforts I may find in New York, regardless of the physical distance from Uganda's daily tribulations, regardless of how many seasons turn, I will not forget. I will utilize every podium available to champion your rights. I will leverage every ounce of influence I acquire to plead your case before the world. I will deploy whatever resources I gather to bolster the democratic machinery within Uganda. And one day, the date is unknown, but certain, I shall return to the soil, not arriving as a foreign diplomat, nor as a tourist, nor as an exile who abandoned his roots, but as a true citizen of Uganda. Returning to the nation I have never ceased to cherish. Returning to the terrain my father was compelled to flee in his time. Returning to a liberated Uganda, a democratic republic, a land where bright young souls like David Mukasa are not sacrificed on the altar of political belief. That Uganda is approaching. And until that reunion, I will harbor the nation in my spirit, precisely as my parents instructed me. I will be the voice for the silenced. I will be the memory for those cast into oblivion. I will labor for the dawn where every Ugandan child rises in liberty. Uganda Yawanga Ayabwe, our beloved Uganda. May she one day stand liberated, carrying all my affection, all my sorrow, and all my aspiration. Signed, a loyal son of the soil.